Anna had always loved the mountains. They were a place where she could escape the noise of the city, catch her breath, and reset her mind. That's why, when the opportunity arose, she decided to embark on a solitary trek in the Bieszczady Mountains. At this time of year, in late autumn, the mountains were quiet and empty. It was exactly what she needed: peace and solitude. She set off at dawn when the mist still enveloped the valleys. Her backpack was filled with essentials, with a map and compass in her pocket and sturdy trekking boots on her feet. The sun was slowly rising, casting a golden glow on the paths, and she felt that this would be a perfect day. She walked for several hours without encountering anyone. The higher she climbed, the fewer signs of civilization she saw behind her. With each passing hour, she felt more detached from the world and more connected to nature. Eventually, she reached the top of one of the hills, offering a panoramic view of the entire area. All around were trees, rocks, and an endless sea of autumn colors. However, something was not right. Anna began to feel a strange tension. It was the feeling that told her she was not alone. She looked around, but saw no one. "It's just my imagination," she thought, shaking off the uneasy feeling. Determined to enjoy her solitude, she continued along the path, deeper into the wilderness. The sun was high in the sky when she noticed the first signs of change. The once clear path began to narrow, the trees grew denser, and the air became colder. The vibrant colors of autumn seemed to fade into a muted palette of browns and grays. Anna paused to check her map. According to it, she should be nearing a small clearing, but there was no sign of it. Doubt began to creep into her mind. Had she taken a wrong turn? Pushing forward, she tried to ignore the growing unease. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker, as if the daylight itself was being swallowed by the trees. Shadows lengthened, and the silence became oppressive. The crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional call of a distant bird were the only sounds that broke the eerie quiet. As evening approached, Anna knew she needed to find a place to set up camp. She found a small clearing just big enough for her tent. With the last light of the day, she hurriedly set up her shelter and gathered some wood for a fire. As the flames flickered to life, she felt a small measure of comfort return. The warmth of the fire and the familiar routine of preparing her camp meal helped to push the unsettling thoughts to the back of her mind. Night fell quickly in the mountains. The stars above were brilliant in the clear, cold sky, but the forest around her was impenetrable darkness. Sitting by the fire, Anna tried to relax, but the feeling of being watched persisted. She rationalized it away as paranoia, a natural response to being alone in the wilderness. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves and creating strange, whispering sounds. Anna listened intently, trying to distinguish the normal noises of the forest from something more sinister. Suddenly, she heard a distinct, deliberate crack of a branch breaking underfoot. Her heart raced as she peered into the darkness, but she saw nothing. Telling herself it was probably just an animal, she reluctantly crawled into her tent, leaving the fire burning low outside. She tried to sleep, but every noise seemed amplified in the silence. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she drifted into a restless sleep. She awoke with a start in the middle of the night. The fire had gone out, and the darkness was complete. Anna lay still, straining her ears. There it was again, the sound of footsteps, slow and measured, circling her tent. Fear gripped her as she realized these were not the sounds of an animal, but of a person. She reached for her flashlight and turned it on, the beam piercing the darkness. Holding her breath, she unzipped the tent slightly and shone the light outside. The clearing was empty. She scanned the area, her heart pounding, but saw nothing unusual. Deciding it was best to stay inside, she zipped the tent back up and clutched the flashlight tightly, willing herself to stay awake. Minutes felt like hours as she listened intently. The footsteps had stopped, but the oppressive silence remained. Just as she was beginning to convince herself it had all been a bad dream, she heard it, a whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from just outside the tent. "Anna!" Her blood ran cold. How did they know her name? Panic set in. She had to get out of there. Quickly but quietly, she packed her essentials and prepared to make a run for it. She unzipped the tent and, with the flashlight in one hand and her map in the other, she stepped into the darkness. The forest was a maze of shadows, and every step seemed to echo loudly in the silent night. She moved as fast as she could, trying to put distance between her and whatever or whoever was out there. But the feeling of being followed never left her. As she navigated through the trees, she realized she had lost her sense of direction. Panic turned to terror as she realized she was hopelessly lost. She stopped to catch her breath and orient herself with the map, but the light from her flashlight flickered and then died, plunging her into complete darkness. Anna fought back tears of frustration and fear. She had to keep moving. Blindly, she stumbled through the forest, branches scratching at her arms and face. Hours seemed to pass as she wandered aimlessly. Just when she felt she could go no further, she saw a faint light in the distance. Hope surged through her. Maybe it was a cabin or a campsite. She moved toward the light, her steps quickening. As she drew closer, the light grew brighter, and she saw it was coming from a small, dilapidated cabin. Relief washed over her. She approached the door and knocked, but there was no answer. Desperate, she pushed the door open and stepped inside. The cabin was empty, with only a single lantern casting a dim glow. The place looked abandoned, but it offered shelter. She closed the door behind her and collapsed on the floor, exhausted. For a moment, she allowed herself to relax, but then she noticed something odd. The walls of the cabin were covered in strange markings, symbols she didn't recognize. A chill ran down her spine as she realized these were not random scribbles, but deliberate, almost ritualistic drawings. Before she could react, the door creaked open. Anna froze as a figure stepped into the cabin. It was a man, his face obscured by shadows, but his presence radiated menace. He spoke in a low, gravelly voice. "Anna, you shouldn't have come here." Paralyzed with fear, Anna couldn't respond. The man took a step closer, and she could see his eyes gleaming in the lantern light, cold and devoid of emotion. "You belong to the mountains now," he said, his voice sending shivers down her spine. In a sudden burst of adrenaline, Anna grabbed the lantern and swung it at the man. He staggered back, and she took the opportunity to run. She didn't look back as she fled the cabin, plunging once again into the darkness of the forest. Her mind raced as she tried to find a way out. She had to get back to civilization, to safety, but the forest seemed endless, and the sense of being hunted was ever present. Just as dawn began to break, she stumbled upon a familiar path. Her heart leapt with relief as she recognized the way back to the village where she had started her trek. Summoning the last of her strength, she hurried down the path, not stopping until she reached the outskirts of the village. Breathless and disheveled, she collapsed at the door of the first house she found. The kind villagers took her in, and she tried to explain what had happened. But when they went back to the forest to investigate, there was no sign of the cabin or the man. The villagers spoke in hushed tones about old legends and spirits that roamed the mountains. Anna never returned to the Bieszczady Mountains after that. The memory of her solitary trek haunted her dreams, a reminder that some places are meant to be left undisturbed.